My name is Timothy Bill, and I am interviewing Ann Engel on behalf of the Coalition of Rainbow Alliances as part of their historical interview project. The goal of this project is to capture the local history of the Central Illinois LGBTQ community. This interview is with Ann Engel, a board member of Coral. So we'll go ahead and just start at the beginning. Ann, where were you born, and what was your childhood like?
I was actually born in Chicago, and I lived there till I was about 3, when my mother remarried and moved us to Whitehall, Illinois. Whitehall was a great place to be a kid. It was not a great place to be gay, but I didn't really figure that out until later in life. I would say I had kind of a mixed childhood. My mother was a fantastic person. She did everything she could to take care of us. My stepdad, really I don't think was interested in having children. I'm not quite sure exactly how they got together. I found out later in life they probably had a marriage of convenience and that my stepdad was gay. So it was an interesting childhood. It's become more interesting the more I learn. And he was kind of a gruff old guy. So they were not the most compatible people. But in general, I'd say it was not a bad childhood.
And then did you go all the way through high school then in Whitehall?
I did. I think there were like 100 of us in my graduating class. And then I ended up at Illinois State, where there were thousands of us. So that was a pretty big step. A really good step for me because I really did not like school. And I came from, my mother's family was really big on education, and she was a teacher. So not liking school was kind of an oddity in my family. I got compared to my brothers a lot, who were like these major brainiacs, and I think because I didn't like it so much, I didn't realize that I was probably just as smart as them. I just didn't care. So
And how many siblings do you have?
I have 2 older brothers. One is somewhere in Wisconsin. He's a dentist, and the other one I think is in Missouri. Last I heard, he was a golf pro.
Oh, wow.
So,
And what was your life like after graduating high school, going off to college?
wow, life really changed. I loved college. As a matter of fact, I would be a perpetual student if I could afford to. I really found my way. I made a lot of friends, which I had friends in high school, but I never really I didn't fit in very well. I was a teacher's kid, and so I didn't get in trouble. And if you got in trouble, you were in twice as much trouble at home. So I kind of kept my nose clean, and I didn't party. I didn't really party in college either, but I got to express myself a lot more and meet people from a lot of different backgrounds, which you don't really do in Whitehall.
And so it's interesting that you note that you really enjoyed school and would be a perpetual student from college, because you mentioned that you really didn't like high school. Yeah. What do you think led to that switch for you?
Well, yeah, first of all, just the freedom. You get to pick the classes. When you go to a really small high school, you take what they offer, and basically, my senior year I had like 4 study halls because I had taken all the courses I possibly could, and it was just out of things to do, and they would not let you graduate early. So I actually finished my undergrad in 3 years.
Wow.
So.
And then what did you do after your undergraduate? What was the next step for you?
Well, I I wanted to be a teacher, and my mother did not want me to be a teacher. She was very active in the unions and had they'd been on strike a couple times while I was in high school, and she said, I want you to go to college to be anything but a teacher. So I sort of circumvented her and became a librarian. And I ended up in Pekin, Illinois, which again was not the greatest place to be gay, and that's where I came out. So I met a really nice group of women there. It was a very confusing time. I was still dating guys, and I had this great group of female friends, and on the weekends they would go party their way, but they never invited me, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. So finally, one of my friends and I had a talk, and she's like, well, you know, we go to the gay bars. And I kind of got to thinking about it, and I'm like, oh, well, okay. And for a little while, I would go to the gay bars with them with my male date, and then kind of figured out that that really wasn't what I was interested in.
When do you think you first realized that you might be gay, might be LGBTQ?
Wow. I was slow, man. I was 21 probably, 22 maybe. My mother said she knew when I was 12, and I kept telling her, you know, if you just told me, we'd have saved a lot of time. She said she didn't want to influence me. So, but I was in my early 20s.
And what was your coming out process like?
I had kind of a strange coming out process. The guy I had dated in college, who I probably would have married had he asked me, and I'm still friends with today and love him dearly, was the first person who said, I think you're gay. And I, of course, told him that he was full of it, that he was just upset because I was changing and kind of coming into myself a little bit. And I spent a lot of time, I think, yeah, it was the 80s. We spent a lot of time in discos. We did a lot of dancing. We did a lot of drinking. And a lot of hiding as well, which is hard in Pekin. And I was what they call the special services librarian, which meant I did all their PR. So I was in the paper all the time. And it's really hard to be in the paper and be open. And so I wasn't. And I really did not come out fully until I moved to Chicago.
And about how long do you think you were in the closet in Pekin?
I lived in Pekin for about a year and a half, and then I went back to Illinois State to get a master's. And I came out pretty strong there. I did a lot of speakers bureaus for the huge psych and social classes with a good group of friends. I met a woman that I had a backyard marriage with there, and we were together for 4 or 5 years. And those were some really good times. We had a lot of fun. We had a strong group of friends, and you know, we were in an academic setting, which, as I said, that kind of became where I felt the most comfortable.
It sounds like it was a really supporting place to be out.
Oh, it was a great place to be out. The funniest thing I can remember, though, was walking into one of those big classrooms with, 400 people, and sitting in the front row is the sister of one of my good friends from Whitehall. And my parents did not know at that point yet, and really I didn't talk about it with anybody back home. And she came up to me after class, and we had this little chat, and I'm like, now, it's one thing for me to be out here. And she's like, oh, I get it, I'm not going to say anything. And I'm like, one day everybody I'll be able to talk to mom and dad, and then it'll be cool, but if you could kind of keep that a little quiet for me, I'd appreciate it.
Did you grow up in a religious household?
I did, actually. not ultra religious. Uh, we were the only Jewish family in Whitehall, and we came here to Springfield sometimes 2-3 times a week to go to Temple Bur Shalom. And my mother was more interested in us knowing our history. Her parents were immigrants from Russia, so she was first generation, and she wanted us to at least know what our religion was about. I think for both my parents, that was probably the biggest disappointment about my being gay, was that there was not going to be a big Jewish wedding. I think my dad had dreams of walking me down the aisle, and he had a picture in his head of what it was supposed to be like, and that just wasn't going to happen.
How was the coming out process for you in terms of your spiritual life? Was that an impediment to coming out for you, or how did you work through that?
Well, that's a really good question. I would say at this point in my life, I'm probably agnostic. I do believe in the history. I like the ceremony, but I don't have a very strong faith. When I was coming out, and I was in Chicago, there is a gay temple. So there was opportunity to practice if you wanted to. And I tried it for a little while, and it was an okay place, but it wasn't really my thing. So I just never really pursued it.
So after you got your master's degree, what happened? What was the next step for your life?
Well, the first master's I got was actually in sociology. My intent was to be an academic librarian. And you have to have a master's in library science and a master's in a subject field. So I went back and I got the master's in the subject field. And then I met my wife, and we made a decision. She was a few years younger than me, and she was finishing at Wesleyan. And we made a deal that whoever got a job first, the other would follow. So she got a job first, and we landed in Joliet. I kind of have made this progression from southern Illinois up through the north and back again. So she got a job, and I ended up working as a librarian in a youth prison for a while, which was incredibly stressful. And I started looking for other positions, and about that time, things were not going so well in our marriage. And when I got a position in Chicago and we sat down to talk about it, she said, "Well, you're going and I'm not," which was, I mean, I knew we had some issues, but I didn't know we had issues. So, and that's kind of how I ended up in Chicago and was there for 20 years.
So it seems like that was a big turning point in your life.
That was a shock to the system, in terms of relationship, in terms of job change, and I went to work at DeVry, which when I started there was still a technical school, and now it's called DeVry University, even though if you look very closely it's DeVry University Incorporated. They hired me as their library director, which I did for 10 years, and I taught part-time for them as well. Started my doctorate, and which took like 17 of those 10 years, I think, or 17 of those 20 years. And about halfway through, they promoted me to professorship, and I went about as high as you could go in their ranks, and I kind of had known since my very first master's that teaching was what I really wanted to do. I mean, I kind of knew it when I went to get my undergrad, but I got to teach as a TA, and I just fell in love. So that was a big step for me.
So almost coming full circle from wanting to teach,
really
going to be a librarian, and then all the way around back to
really
teaching.
did, yeah. And I loved being a librarian. It was a lot of fun. I like to read all kinds of things, and just being surrounded. Of course, then libraries were much more traditional, so there were just books everywhere, and you never knew what you were going to come across. And I especially liked doing reference work because people could ask you anything, and they would ask you anything, which was always a lot of fun. I was doing an internship at one point, and I had college roommates, and I was working a reference desk in Bloomington Normal, and my roommates called one day and asked me some very explicit questions, and I had another librarian sitting right next to me, so I couldn't be a smart aleck about it. And I was very polite, and they're like, "Do you know who this is?" And I'm like, "Yes, I do." And they're like, "Are you mad at us?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And then I went off into the book stacks to find out the average length of the male penis. And of course, when I called them back to give them the answer to this question, the librarian next to me is like, I'm asking them questions now to see if I can embarrass them. And I'm like, "Now, did you mean in length or circumference?" And the librarian's looking at me, and she's looking at the book that I've got, and I got this book of sexuality, and she's like, "What was that?" And I said, we're supposed to answer questions from the public. And oddly enough, when we answered the phone, "Adult Services, may I help you?" Which just made it all the much better.
So it sounds like you're really enjoying your professional life at this point, where you're living in Chicago, working as a librarian, as a professor. What was your personal life like? What was your social life like?
Well, I dated. The opportunities for dating in Chicago were good. Then there were still several women's bars. The women's community in general was fabulous. There was always something to do. I played softball for 10 years on the same lesbian team, and I loved that. I had a couple of relationships that lasted 3 or 4 years each, but I never really met somebody I would consider my soulmate.
And did your relationship with your family change at this point? Did you end up coming out while you were in Chicago?
I came out to my mom when I was in grad school. And oddly enough, she begged me not to tell my dad. She was just sure he would lose it. And we didn't tell him for like another 10, 15 years, although I'm sure he knew. I came out to my family, the rest of my family, when my college girlfriend and I got married. Nobody showed up, but nobody from the family showed up. Although everybody claimed not to be homophobic, I think my brothers carried quite a bit of issues with that. My extended family is fine with it, and has always been very welcoming. we seem to have quite a genetic strain that runs through the family. So there's a lot of us. And most of the family's been really very good to me.
So what brought you back to Springfield then? Because we followed you all the way up to Chicago, and you said you made a return back down to the center part of the state.
Yeah, well, a couple things happened. While I was teaching at DeVry, I was the victim of a hate crime in my classroom. I was verbally attacked by one of my students, and had I not walked out of the classroom, which was the worst dilemma for me because, you know, you're supposed to protect your students as well. I think I would have been physically attacked, so I walked out long enough to hit the emergency phone in the hallway, and I walked back in. And the administration did not back me. And I ended up off on leave with PTSD. When I was ready to come back, they conveniently had done away with my position. So I had to decide what I was going to do with my life, and I couldn't really afford to stay in Chicago without work. I went back to my folks for a little while and looked for work, and we were in a recession, and they were not hiring very well. So I went back and got my social work degree. That's all of them now. That's all 4 degrees. And came back again while I was looking for a job after I finished, and discovered that my mother was not doing so well, and ended up staying.
So at that time, were you working as a social worker?
I worked as a social worker for about 2 years on and off. And as I kind of watched Mom go downhill and I knew she was going to need more help, I came back to, I was hoping that I would find a social work job here in Springfield. But I couldn't find anything that was flexible enough to let me help her. So I ended up doing retail for a while. There's nothing like having a ton of degrees and going back to doing retail work. But a job's a job, and it paid for an apartment, and Mom continued to go downhill, and things with her and my father were not good. And one day she called me and said, I'm going to come up to Springfield and stay with you. And she basically never left. I knew she was in the beginning stages of dementia, and that I'm not so sure my father was not also in the beginning stages of dementia, but he was not treating her well, and she stayed with me until we could get her into housing. She ended up in housing, and I ended up homeless for about 6 months until I could get back on my feet, and I actually then ended up here in this apartment and have been here 8 years now.
It sounds like that was a really challenging time, just in terms of social connections and...
Wow. It was crazy. I knew that the gay community was so different down here, and I didn't know what I was going to find. And I couldn't find community, really. I got involved a little bit with brothers and sisters, but I was so overwhelmed with taking care of Mom. Oddly enough, I specialized in elder care in social work school, and I did everything that we tell people not to do. You know, I didn't take care of myself. I dedicated everything to taking care of Mom, and I kind of lost myself in that. And I had a really tough time even just making friends. And I think a lot of that was I was stressed and I was tired. And it weirdly enough, in the last just couple months, I've had 3 people say to me in one way or another, when we first met you 10, 12 years ago, you were kind of intimidating, or you were kind of hard to get to know, or you sort of scared us. And I'm like, wow, I've never seen myself quite that way. Although my mother used to say that to me, in terms of working with other professional women, that, I would say, Mom, I don't understand why I'm having difficulty. And she's like, well, I think you intimidate people because you speak your mind and you're sure of yourself. And I'm like, well, but I don't mean to scare people. I'm just saying what I think, and I don't think I'm being rude. I'm just trying to get my ideas out there. So that has given me a lot of pause over the years, even before people said it to me recently, to think more about how I do come across. I think I have 2 really different personas. My professional persona is really strong. So when I'm sitting on a board like Coral, I come across really strong. When it comes to making friends, I'm a lot shyer than people think.
Do you think maybe some levels introversion, or how would you classify yourself there between extrovert or introvert?
I think I really am introverted in my social life. I've worked really hard at it these last couple years to make friends here in Springfield, and I've made a nice group of friends who I'm really going to miss. But I still haven't made the kind of connections that I'm hoping that I make in California. Obviously, it's a whole different world out there, and the opportunity is so different.
What would you say has helped you find a sense of resiliency? You've gone through so many experiences in your life. What has kept you going? Because I think a lot of people would have, shut down under those circumstances.
And I have had my periods where I have shut down. I've suffered some pretty severe depressions in my life, which probably also is what people attributed to my unfriendliness at times. That's another thing that runs genetically in our family. I was abused as a kid, which sort of started the PTSD very young. And I think actually that's where the resiliency comes from, is you either survived or you didn't. And I take a lot of that from my mom. My mom was quite a survivor. And just seeing what she did to take care of us kids, I think taught me a lot about what you do to survive and to get by.
So you mentioned a little bit ago about getting more involved with the LGBTQ community here in Springfield. What was that process like for you?
That was a hard process for me. I knew a few people. Mom passed 3 years ago, and I started to come out of my shell, and I started going to brothers and sisters regularly, and apparently came off better because I got to know people and enjoyed spending time with the group that I met. I found that the community here, it's really difficult to get into the women's community here. And I don't think that's just coming from me. I think if you talk to other women in the community, you'll find that as well, that when you're a newcomer, or even if you've been around for a while, most of the women are coupled or closeted. And there's a lot of jealousy, there's a lot of suspicion, um, even when you're just buddies with somebody, you know, their wife doesn't want you around. So it was very hard for me to get involved. Uh, and actually, when the opportunity to become part of Coral's board came up, that was like the greatest thing for me, because I was already starting to get involved more with Coral, but it gave me the opportunity to be really active and to meet more people.
And how did you get more involved with Coral? What was the process of making that connection?
Wow. Well, I started to go to meetings uh, because I made myself a promise that I was going to give myself a year, and if in that year life did not change the way I wanted it to, I needed to really reevaluate, was Springfield the place for me to be? And since I no longer had familial commitments, I was free to do that. So I started going to meetings, I started talking more. When a project would come up, like when we worked on the room at Lincoln Prairie, and somebody said, "Hey, do you want to come help?" I'm like, yeah, sure. Let's paint a room. And oddly enough, by the time I got there, even though I was on the second shift, they'd almost finished. And I was like, okay, well, what do you need help with? So I think that, and a lot of the women that I'm friends with are members of Church of the Brethren. So having the connection between them and Coral helped as well, and gave me the opportunity to know more people.
And so you mentioned you eventually joined the board of Coral. What was that process like?
I had two people within like the same week ask me if I was interested. Paula asked me, and I believe Brian asked me. And I'm like, well, what's that mean? You know? And they both lied. They're like, oh, it's just a meeting, you know, once a month, twice a month, you know, it's not a big commitment. But it was not a bad lie. And really it was more of a commitment because I wanted it to be. So, but for a while there, I felt like all I did was go to meetings. And then we got some projects started that I was having fun with, and that was really great because I was spending more time in the community, in the gay community, and in the serving the Springfield community, and that means a lot to me. There's a pretty strong social worker in there at heart as well, as a teacher, and I enjoy doing those things.
And what would you say your proudest accomplishment is as part of Coral?
I would have to say the work that Bert and I did on the food pantries. That really was just an amazing project, and we weren't sure it was ever going to go anywhere, and one day we just went to the grocery store and we both donated $100 each and said, let's see how much food we can buy. And then we took it right to the pantries and we checked it out, and we're like, oh, and you know, people were coming out from Fifth Street Renaissance and from the Boys and Girls Club asking, what are you guys doing? Why are you taking pictures of our building? And we're like, well, we're thinking about this project to help you keep your food pantries full. And what really was supposed to be a 6-weekend project that turned into, I can't remember how many months, was fabulous and felt so good. I got, you know, they say everybody gets their 15 minutes of fame. I got a minute 45 seconds when I got to be on WAND. That was fun. And it felt really good to know that I could step up and speak. You know, I taught classes of 300 students, but I'd never been on TV before. And I really enjoyed doing kind of the second part of that project, which we raised money to fill the Christmas stockings with hygiene products, and I think we had kind of a 50-50. People wanted to do it, they didn't want to do it, and I'm like, well, I'll just take it on. You just help me collect the stuff, and I will buy all the stuff. I'll take whatever money we earn, and I will fill the stockings. And my whole apartment was filled for weeks with, you know, I'd have stockings laid out all over the floor, and I was trying to make sure everybody got equal stuff in them. And we raised a ton of money for that, and that made me feel really good that we were really doing some good work for the whole community.
And then those stockings were donated?
Those stockings went to, I think there were 54 stockings total, and it cost about $30 or so to fill the stockings, so my math isn't very good. Half of them went to Fifth Street Renaissance, so a lot of them went to their Veterans Project and to needy families. And then the other half went to Boys and Girls Club, and we let them choose who needed them the most. So.
Now, if I'm correct in my history, I believe you're the second lesbian to ever be on the board of Choral. What does that mean to you, or what reflections do you have about that?
I think that's really cool. I was really honored to be asked. And truthfully, I knew that Choral had a little bit of a history of being an old boys club. So the fact that they were wanting to include more women and to become more diverse was good. I see Choral changing a little bit every day, and it really excites me to see that it's going to be revitalized and do some good things. I was a little concerned at one point that, you know, Choral might kind of fade away, and I think that would be really sad for Springfield. And I think we saw that just this past Saturday at our Pride event, that we had such a diverse group, and that coming out of COVID we had over 40 people there, and we had young people there, and that's encouraging. So I'm hoping that that continues, and that we continue to grow in diversity, and that Choral not only survives but thrives.
And I know you've also been involved with a recent project called Women for Women.
Yes.
Would you like to speak a little bit about that?
Sure. Women for Women came out of the consortium that was, what, 3 years now?
Yeah.
Wow. COVID just ruined everybody's sense of time. That found that there was a need for something in the women's community, not necessarily knowing what, but something. And really, there was nothing specific for women here. There's a history of groups, but pretty long since passed or not successful. So you and Rob contacted me and said, hey, do you want to sit on this committee and see what happens? And I said, sure, let's find out. And we got a great group of people together on the committee. and created this Women for Women that is now a social media group on Facebook. And last I checked, which was just the other day, there's like 84 members, which amazes me. That's just over a couple month period. People are posting fun things. There's been one social event that was an online event that went pretty well. I think as things open up more, they're going to do a lot of fun stuff. And I think it's going to be a very diverse group. Yeah, I was just talking with the other two admins on the group the other day, and we've decided that, although I've already stepped down, because I'm leaving in like 6 days for California, which I've been trying to do since undergrad. I graduated from undergrad, so I'm only like 40 years later, but I'm getting there now. And we talked about, it's maybe time to bring the committee together again, because now we've come up with a few issues that we didn't anticipate, which anytime you start a new group you do. And I'm excited that they're gonna get that together. They're looking for a third admin now, I think, and the Dre and Margaret are working really well together. So it's exciting to see people posting things and just getting online and checking to see if anything's happening.
So I'm certain that once we look back on history at this point, there'll be lots of examinations of what everyone's life was like during the coronavirus pandemic. What has COVID been like for you?
Well, the first 6 months of COVID were okay for me, because I can be a hermit when I want to. And although, because I had really started to get out more, it was harder than I anticipated. And because of the PTSD, when I do stay home too much, then it makes it harder to get back out. And that concerned me, that, well, once we actually could get back out, would I? And as it turned out, that was okay. I was really glad when we started to open up a little bit, and I looked back at those year goals that I had set, and I said, well, I'm not really where I want to be. And I took a 2-week trip out to California, where I have family, and while I was out there, I bought a home, and my cousin hired me to work in his medical practice until I decide what I really want to do out there. And I came back and I started packing immediately. And I'm totally looking forward to a whole new chapter in my life and new adventures.
And what are you hoping for this new chapter? Because it is as I mentioned, a lifelong dream to move out to California.
Yeah, I love it out there. And part of it is the family. That's my mom's side of the family, and they're a whole different, they're a very kind and gentle people, very caring group, and I'm looking forward to spending a lot of time with family. And I have a whole extended family out there. As a matter of fact, as soon as I posted on Facebook that I was coming to stay, people started calling me that I hadn't heard from in years, and they're like, well, when are you getting here? And I'm like, okay, can I pack first? I'm looking for a couple things. I'm looking for community that is tremendously larger than what we have here. I miss what I had in Chicago. I like the casual nature of California. And I already have connections. My cousin, who I will be working for, is already trying to fix me up. I'm not sure I want that. I might be beyond that point in my life, although I would like a nice group of friends to hang with. I wouldn't mind somebody that I was dating on a regular basis. That would be nice. Do I want to live with somebody after, God, 20 years of living on my own? Maybe not. I kind of like my own space and doing my own thing. But I'm also looking forward to having a career again. After the attack by the student, the PTSD got really bad, and I ended up on disability. And that and taking care of Mom was pretty traumatic, and so I haven't worked at a real job. I've done a lot of volunteer stuff. I do a lot of social work pro bono. But I'm looking forward to starting a career again and not being on disability if I can. And if my brain and my body won't let me do that, at least maybe doing something part-time that's... I'm a big proponent of social justice and of helping where you can. So if I can do that, I'm going to be really happy.
And how would you like to be remembered for your time in Springfield?
Not the way I think most people think of me. I'm still a little shocked that people think that I'm scary. I would like to be remembered for the good stuff I've done through choral. I would like to be remembered for the stuff that I did for my mother and the fact that I hung in there when nobody else would.
Is there anything else you'd like to add, or anything you feel like we've missed in this conversation?
I'm going to miss some folks here a lot, and I'm hoping that those folks that I really do feel close to will not just disappear, and that I won't let that happen either. I keep saying I know I'm going across the country, but we have all this technology. We should be able to. We did it for a year when we couldn't see each other, so I'd really like to keep those connections. And I think that's, pretty much it. Have I missed anything that you'd like to know?
No, I think that's it.
Cool.
Well, thank you for your time, and best of luck on this next chapter of your life.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.